sustainability. A large part of the investment indices nowadays are represented by tech companies. If you look at the World MSCI World Index, Investment Index, the 5 largest companies, so the GAFAM, represent 12% of the investment universe, whereas the index counts 1,600 companies. So those companies have a big impact on our daily lives. So for investors, it's nowadays keys also to look at what those companies are doing. If we want to promote sustainability, responsibility, we have to consider also the digital impact, the digital impact of those companies. So that's why for us, the work of the World Benchmarking Alliance is key. The insight of the studies that Samita will present now are very useful, not only for investors, for all stakeholders, actually, to judge and to see the progress of tech companies in this field. So I'm very much looking forward for the discussion today. First of all, we will have the presentation of the result, and then a very high-level lineup to discuss all these issues of the digital inclusion benchmark result for the 3rd edition. So please welcome on stage Samita, who is senior researcher at the World Benchmarking Alliance, specializing on those questions. So please, Samita, present us the latest result.
Thank you, Vincent, and thank you all of you for being here today. As he said, I'm Samita, and I'm a senior researcher for digital inclusion at WDA. And let me just try to find the works. So a little bit about the World Benchmarking Alliance, are a nonprofit organization holding 2,000 of the most influential companies in the world accountable for their part in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And we do this through publicly available and free benchmarks to measure their performance. The Digital Inclusion Benchmark does this for the digital sector. And here we assess 200 of the most influential digital companies on their performance on digital inclusion. So we provide a race to the top for inclusive and trustworthy digital transformation. Our benchmark methodology looks at 4 interrelated areas that include enhancing universal access to digital technologies, and improving all levels of digital skills, fostering trustworthy use by mitigating risks and harms, and ensuring open, inclusive, and ethical innovation. And this is our 3rd iteration, like Vincent said, and in the first 2 iterations that took place in 2020, where we assessed 100 digital companies, and then in 2021, where we assessed 150 digital companies, we used the methodologies that looked at the 4 areas of digital inclusion. This iteration, we looked at the methodology for the digital inclusion benchmark, as well as what we call the social transformation methodology that made up the 5th part of our methodology for this year. And this social transformation includes different social indicators that look at how companies are respecting human rights, how they're providing and promoting decent work, and if they're acting ethically. So a quick look at where the 200 companies land in the sector. They're broadly categorized into 3 sectors within the digital ecosystem: the hardware sector, telecommunication and services, and IT software and services. And here's also a visual of where kind of the subsectors that are represented in the benchmark as well. And looking at the global reach of the 200 companies, while they're headquartered in 51 economies around the world, more than 175 economies are actually presented through the 200 companies in the benchmark. And looking at the magnitude of the revenue and the number of people that they employ, we can see that they truly are influential around the world, which is why we assess them in their contribution towards the SDGs. So in this iteration, we are going to share with you the key findings of the 2023 Digital Inclusion Benchmark results. I also wanted to briefly explain the research process. And in the research process, we conduct a pre-assessment of the companies looking at the methodology, and then we provide this pre-assessment to the companies and provide them an opportunity to give us feedback and engage with us so that we can look at more of their publicly available information that we might have missed in the first stage of the assessment. And by looking at their publicly available reports and their website, we finalize the assessment and provide the ranking and the score. And since I showed you the 5 areas in the beginning, each area makes up 20% of the company's final score. So the first key finding was, The first key finding was related to the incorporation of the social transformation inside the digital inclusion benchmark. So we saw that truly this provided a more comprehensive view of company performance in digital inclusion. So when we look at the challenges that are in the tech sector, inherently, they are very much related to human rights issues because they're related to ethical AI, ethical artificial intelligence, or digital rights for children, and data privacy. So it was really important to see how the company's scores were also affected by incorporating this social transformation element within the assessment. And because the tech sector tends to be highly unregulated, sometimes companies' commitments to these kind of areas are really what we feel that is a way to hold them accountable. But there are ways that stakeholders can actually influence company behavior by engaging with the companies and encouraging them to commit to human rights and address these digital risks that, and by this engagement, it could have significant effect in the company behavior in changing some of the tech industry's biggest problems. And it was also interesting to see actually that the top 3 companies in the benchmark in this iteration are actually also the top 3 companies when you just look at the social indicators. So that was actually kind of encouraging to see. Our second key finding is a general commentary on the performance of the companies in this iteration. So we saw slight improvement in overall performance, but still most companies have a long way to go to achieve digital inclusion. We saw that out of the 200 companies, only 27 that were assessed passed more than 50 in the out of 100 score. So the 150 companies that were assessed last year, when we look at just their performance in this year's iteration, the average company score in digital inclusion went up by 6.8%. So while there is this slight improvement, we still need, there's still huge progress needed from the 173 companies that are below the 50% mark. Our third key finding is that we saw how global events affected company performance. So in the last few years, we've seen how COVID-19 has affected the world, but also we've seen how tech companies have been particularly susceptible to the global events like the COVID-19 pandemic. And through this COVID-19, it pushed the world to be digitally connected. So you needed internet access. You also needed digital technologies in order to work and also in order to be able to get education. So this provided an opportunity for digital companies to really step up, and we saw that they did step up. So in the previous iteration, we followed how many companies had COVID-19 related digital inclusion initiatives. And then in this year's iteration, we looked at how many of those initiatives were actually continued. And it was actually discouraging to see that only 37% of these companies actually continued the COVID-19 pandemic initiatives. And when you look at the kind of initiatives that they were targeting vulnerable populations. So, the demand for these digital skills and access to digital technologies remains, but companies, not all the companies have continued these initiatives. And also external events, after the COVID wave passed and also the global economy changes in the global economy, we've seen massive layoffs from specifically tech companies as well. And this also kind of shows us that, external events really influence company behavior, but we still have a long way to go to make sure that digital companies are motivated, intrinsically to really contribute to digital inclusion, especially because now the consequence of the digital divide is way bigger than it was a few years ago. Our fourth key finding was to mine the data gaps. So while we saw that there were some companies that were really extremely transparent in their reporting, we still find some that are not. So this opaqueness was manifested in various ways in our assessment. So for instance, in our methodology, we look at how companies are reporting the Global Reporting Initiative disclosures, so the GRI disclosures. And you see in the graph here, we've divided the donut chart there into how many companies had no disclosures at all, how many do have disclosure, and how many acknowledge this disclosure that they are going to have in the report by mentioning the GRI related to specific issues. But when you actually follow the page number or actually go to the report that's been pointed out, that specific data point is actually not there. So when we look at the greenhouse gas emissions, we saw even, some kind of greenwashing because companies are reporting their market-based emissions for their scope 2 emissions, which tend to be lower instead of their location-based ones. And also when you look at, for example, their commitments around, child online safety or ethical AI principles in company policy documents, the language that is used to, disclose these comments are quite vague. So then it's really hard to understand what is the company's stance on these issues in order for us to hold them accountable. And our fifth key finding is actually an encouraging one because we saw that stakeholders can influence company behavior. And the World Benchmarking Alliance's allies, such as yourselves, investors, civil society, think tanks, and NGOs and others, have been instrumental in supporting the benchmark's work. So the allies specifically look at the results and the insights that they get from the results of the benchmark, and then use that to act together to bring about the change in the digital sector. In the previous iteration, the focus of this the alliance was on ethical AI principles. So what we noticed in our first two benchmarks was that a minuscule number of companies were actually publishing their ethical AI principles. So the coalition was created called the Collective Impact Coalition for Digital Inclusion, where investors in this coalition engaged directly with companies and encouraged them to make a public commitment to ethical AI. And it was very encouraging because here you can see on the graph that in 2019, when we first assessed these companies, only 14 companies had these ethical AI principles public. And in 2020, that increased by 4 more companies. And 2021, when the coalition started engaging with companies on this topic directly, led by investors, the number went up increasingly, and significantly in 2021. And as of today, if you were to look at this, that number actually just increased to 45. So we really see that, stakeholders can really influence the company behavior. And even when looking at the impact of the benchmarking process, you can see that in the dark blue is the 100 original companies that we have been benchmarking for the last 3 iterations. And we see the highest increase in the disclosure of ethical AI principles from those 100 original companies. So this was definitely an encouraging sign and a key finding of the benchmark. And that concludes the number of key findings that we saw from this specific iteration of the benchmark. And while we have the results online and you can look at the scorecard of each company and the risks and opportunities for those companies there, we will also be publishing an insights report that will dive deeper into the following topics that you see on the screen. So I would encourage you to take a look at our website in the next few weeks, so you can get a deeper dive into those topics. And here's the top 20 digital companies in the 2023 Digital Inclusion Benchmark. I will leave it on for a little bit while I explain the table. So on the column for the rank, there's the shade green and the red, which green signifies an improvement in the rank, whereas the red signifies a drop in the rank. And if there is no color, that means those companies have maintained their position. Looking at that, I want you to keep in mind that this year's methodology, we incorporated the social indicator performance as well. So when you compare it to last year's or the last iteration's ranking, just have that in mind that the methodology incorporated social as well. And the digital inclusion score is just on the digital inclusion benchmark methodology. The CSI score is the core social indicator score, just looking at the social performance. And the DIB score is when you incorporate both, and which makes up the final score of the digital inclusion benchmark. And like I said previously, the top 3 companies in this benchmark are also the top 3 companies in core social. So that is also encouraging to see as well. Just a little insight that the companies that improved the most in ranking were Dell, SK Telecom, IBM, and AIS. And the biggest drop we saw in this iteration was from Ericsson. And if you would like to quickly scan, there is also a QR code to see more results online. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed seeing the results of this iteration of the digital inclusion benchmark. And I will now hand it back to Vincent so he can kick off the discussions.
Thank you, Ramos Samita, sorry. Great presentation. So I will invite the fellow colleague on the panel discussion, please to join for the discussion. We will open up after the panel the floor to the audience if you have questions to Samita on the result. But first of all, thank you to the panel. I will go in this multi-stakeholder discussion because, as Samita say, all those topics touch a broad range of stakeholders, investors, government, civil society, and I think we have a very good representative of all these stakeholders on the panel. I will start with you, Rizky Amelia. You are the National Digital Literacy Coordinator at the Ministry of ICT in Indonesia, so more the regulator, government point of view on those questions. What are your comments on the key finding on overall performance of digital tech companies in the benchmark? And how do you deal with that at government level, encouraging the private sectors and other players to achieve more digital inclusion?
All right, thank you, Vincent. And I also want to say thank you to the WBA to invite us as a one panelist in here. And to answer your question, I will show you one slide about what Indonesia has been done about the digital inclusion, including the transformation digital in Indonesia. So it's only 3 minutes, so I will do my best to explain about that. So many countries talking about digital literacy or digital transformation in Indonesia. And this is one the urgent agenda in Indonesia that to be done in a couple of years. So we already built the infrastructure in Indonesia. We create the policy, the regulation, and also empowering the ecosystem in Indonesia. That this is the one actualization to keep work on it with other countries for ICT development. In 2021, as you can see on the screen, our President Bapak Joko Widodo is launched the national program of digital literacy. So to boost the digital transformation in Indonesia, we need to prepare resources. We develop the roadmap. We also create the program. And we also maintain how to make the content, the awareness, and also campaign about digital literacy to develop digital transformation in Indonesia. So we can see we have 4 pillars and also the segmentation for digital literacy participation. We have digital skills, digital safety, digital ethics, and also digital cultures. And we divide it into 3 segmentation in the digital literacy participation. The first one is government segment. The second one is education segment, and the last one is, and the biggest one is the community, including the private sector, the elderly, the disability, women, children, etc. So, as we can see that what we can achieve with them, well, including the digital inclusion, we have a mantra to achieve our goals about digital transformation, including how to sustain the digital inclusion. Our mantra is collaboration, inclusive and transparency, until nobody left behind in Indonesia, because we are working with our main strategic partner in cyber creasi. We have more than 120 universe multi-stakeholder to working together to achieve the target, because the government cannot working alone. We need a lot of collaboration also to make it happen. So this is last but not least, we still have homework in government of Indonesia, but we believe with our mantra collaboration, we can make it happen, not only in the short way, but we need maybe more time until we can work not only in Indonesia, but only with other country in the global. Thank you, Vincent.
Thank you very much, Itzi, for this intervention. Now, going more to the corporate and private sector, we have Ellen Laird, Head of Community and Advocacy of Logitech. Something we need to introduce Logitech. If you had your badge, you saw the camera who took your picture with the Logitech camera. I think you were one of the 200 companies surveyed. So for you, what approach has your company taken to improve in efforts to advance digital inclusion, and how has the digital inclusion benchmark helped your company, especially in the implementation of your, I think, gender equality work is something very important. And so tell us a little bit more from the corporate side, how you're using all this work.
Will do. Thank you, Vincent. So Logitech's approach on digital inclusion is really looking at it from what can we do from the skills we have, our expertise, our resources, and then to our brand and also our broader ecosystem, and how can we partner together for better impact and have a bigger change together. So in doing that, we need to have really deep partnerships. I think the best thing to do is to give an example of that. We work with Girls Who Code, great organization who focuses on really promoting women to go into careers into the computer science fields. And we partner with them in a number of different ways. But what we did this last year is we sponsored some independent research to look at what are the true barriers for women in technology and why do they not go into the field. And one of the findings, of course, was that importance of early career role models and the visibility of those role models. So we created a campaign which is focused on women who master. And it looks at women across the globe who have really broken barriers in the tech fields. And one woman in particular, Nelly Chavoy, an incredible person who set up the foundation TechLit Africa. It's an organization that focuses specifically on digital inclusion in Africa. And she, since that kind of amplification, she has been awarded CNN Hero of the Year, and her organization has gained acceleration in terms of what they can do. If you Africa or Nelly Chavoy, I recommend you do so. One warning, if you look up the award ceremony, it's a very emotional affair. Have the tissues beside you when you do so. But I think that's just one example. I think one of our bigger initiatives in the last year, particularly on the gender side as well, is our initiative on co-founding the Coalition for Gender Fair Procurement. So what that is we're encouraging companies to look at their procurement spend. And the mission is to use that spend as a lever for change. So basically, we want companies to look at their supplier base, to question them, to interview them in terms of what do they do in terms of gender equality within their companies, and to create kind of a ranking and an improvement system where you can learn, you can help your suppliers learn and improve and create more transparency around that. So actually the inspiration for that was the digital inclusion benchmark. It uses the same kind of methodology as to where you're trying to measure, you're trying to be transparent and collectively improve together. So, so really through that coalition, there is billions of dollars of corporate spend that if we can influence and encourage those suppliers who that spend is with to doing on gender equality, we can create bigger change together. So that's really on the coalition for gender fair procurement. We've been really pushing that. And so I think to summarize overall, our approach is really to make sure we're partnering with greater partnerships through transparency, through participating in benchmarks like this, that are really encouraging companies together to get collectively better and to keep moving the bar on what we need to do to create, to accelerate towards our SDG goals. Brilliant.
Brilliant. So very interesting to see how the work you're doing at the World Benchmarking Alliance not only influence investors, but also company. And I think l'effet boule de neige, we say in French, if corporates also have those requirements toward their supplier. Amazing. Now we're moving more on the supranational aspect with Michael. Michael Ken, you're a digital development specialist at the World Bank, but also you have several other activities, also chair of the Data Sphere Initiative, and also to mention that you are a member of the expert review committee of the World Benchmarking or the World Digital Benchmark. So, Michael, more on your view, your key comments maybe on the finding that companies aren't doing enough. We saw 27 companies only exceeding 50. That's clearly not enough. What should we do to do more, to get more? And what are the opportunities for improvement to drive transformation in the digital sectors? What's your view there?
Great. Well, thank you. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. Congratulations for the new benchmark. It's been a pleasure to be involved in this initiative throughout the 3 iterations, and very encouraging to hear that some companies are using it as a stimulus for improving and digital inclusion, but obviously not all companies. And I can think of 3 reasons why companies should take these benchmarks seriously and improve along all of the lines. The first is social responsibility. The whole Benchmark Alliance is geared around the SDGs, and improving digital inclusion promotes all of the SDGs, not just 9C. That's the only one that's specifically focused on internet access. So that's the first reason, social responsibility. The second is economic interest. According to the GSMA, 95% of the world could go online today. That means they're covered by at least 3G mobile. And 40% of them, representing what GSMA calls the usage gap, aren't going online. So they could immediately go online. So efforts like this to bring women, girls online, to teach digital skills, to give confidence, will help bring people online, increase the market size for the entire industry, including, of course, all 200 companies.
شرف إنه بي أو البلاتينيوم بارتنر. صباح الخير جميعا. ندعوكم إلى ورشة عمل الإمارات بي. Thank you for joining.
Sorry for the interruption, Michael.
Right. So the second one is just to increase the market size, bring everyone online. That will help all companies, including, of course, the 200 mentioned here. And the final one is kind of a regulation one. We've seen in the US what happens when, in the banking industry, when companies are under-regulated, bad things happen to their customers, bad things happen to their industry. And so to the extent that companies are taking advantage of lax cybersecurity regulations, or simply not doing the best that they could on the cybersecurity part of this, they're not only risking their own customers' data and their own customers leaving, but they're limiting the trust in the entire industry. And again, helping to keep people offline or not doing their full potential online. So for those 3 reasons, I think companies should focus on all parts, all legs of this, and we'll hear about the human rights part in a moment, but they should focus on all parts and take the example here to create partnerships, to bring their cybersecurity in order, to look at the innovation part, and really help to promote digital inclusion for all.
Thank you, Michael. Now moving effectively on the human rights, we have the chance to have Mark Lyman, founder and executive director of Universal Rights Group. So Mark, what's your comment also on the finding of the human rights issues, such as decent work and acting ethically, where these companies are scoring underscoring or not scoring well? considering several challenges for the tech sector. Child digital right, didn't really speak, but tech addiction for children is also a key. When I look at my children playing on those premium games, that's a kind of a worry of me. Ethical artificial intelligence, so the principle of company, which is a good improvement, but still not there yet on the policy side. Data privacy, all those questions which are the core of human rights. What should be done to improve corporate responsibility in this area? What are you doing there?
Before they're working, yeah. So before I answer, I want your assurance there are no more platinum members of the WSIS that are going to interrupt me halfway through. But it's a pleasure to be here. What I'll do is, first of all, I'll comment on the fact that human rights have been included in this this benchmark this time for the first time, and then I'll answer your other questions about what I think about the results. So, as the head of a human rights think tank, you won't be surprised to know that I think it's a good thing that human rights have been included here, but I would like to contextualize that by saying just that human rights and digital technology, or human rights and business generally, is a huge area. And here we're talking about one subsection of it, which is the kind of digital divide, digital inclusion, and those human rights issues relevant to that. Message to Nathan just then, because I don't know, but another benchmark more widely. Okay, so here we're just talking about human rights in the context of digital inclusion, and we're looking in particular in this benchmark human rights, decent work, and this is the digital transformation indicators, acting ethically. I'll come back to that in a second. And the human rights issues broken down further are children's digital rights, ethical AI, and data privacy. There's already in the benchmark, I saw women's rights, women and girls' rights, so we should include that as well. So again, within this subsection of this issue of human rights, here we're broken down even further. We're talking about children, ethical AI, and this is where I come back to this point of ethics, and it comes back again and again in the report that it's a good thing, of course, that companies have ethical frameworks and ethical guidelines, but it's always been a bit of a bugbear of mine working on human rights here, because ethics mean different things to different people and is far inferior as a guiding framework than international human rights law, which has been negotiated, adopted by states, they're universal standards, whereas one person's ethics is not necessarily another person's ethics. So one of the things we're doing at the Universal Rights Group is trying to move businesses away from these discussions on ethics and towards a fully comprehensive human rights-based approach to technology and to business generally. And so this is something that WSIS, the World Benchmarking Alliance, to bear in mind. So then that's the view on the broad methodology here. And then in terms of the results, I mean, it didn't seem to the analysis I read, didn't seem to be breaking down just on this social transformation indicator. But I did see some findings that were obviously of cause concern. One is that only 13 out of 200 companies have high levels of commitment to child online safety, something you talked about, which I wasn't expecting it to be good, but I definitely wasn't expecting it to be that bad. It's really shocking, I find. And then of those, only 9 of those child online safety protocols are truly rooted in children's rights principles, which is concerning. In terms of the future, and then I'll stop. Well, there's also a question. World Benchmarking Alliance. When we talk about digital inclusion, one of the big discussions at the Human Rights Council, in addition to children's rights and women's rights, is socioeconomic inclusion. So the degree to which disadvantaged socioeconomic groups in developed countries, and I'm here to talk about racial discrimination, which is discrimination, have access to the internet, have access to technology. developing countries, the degree to which companies are working proactively in developing countries to promote digital access as a human right. I'd be interested to know the degree to which that was included in the benchmark.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the comment. Effectively on children, there is still much to do. Now it's a good time to open the discussion to the audience. Is there any remarks or comments on the result or on the intervention of the panelists? Vanessa?
Very much. My name is Vanessa Gray, and I'm heading the ITU development sector's work on environment and emergency telecommunication. So I think congratulate you on this really important report and the work that you're doing to make sure that everyone can benefit from the opportunities of digital. Also very happy to see that you've been able to expand from 150 to now 200 companies, which is great. So in terms of the role and the responsibilities of digital companies, I think, great to show what they can do in terms of digital inclusion, how they can drive skills, access and use, but also I think in terms of the mitigation of risks, and here to talk about, ethical business and also in terms of sustainability. And here what ITU is very grateful for is the data that you're producing also in terms of electricity and emissions, because we will be using that to write together with World Benchmarking Alliance companies that will be published in June or July this year, and where we're looking at GHG emission reductions, the impact of digital companies on the environment. So this is for June. And maybe just 2 points that were also mentioned and that stuck out for me in the report is, first of all, in terms of the data gaps, there's major differences between companies, the data they publish. And so, for example, in green, that we mentioned the market-based emissions, which is often lower compared to the location-based emissions, and that still a lot of companies do not publish both, although that is one of a key guideline for companies. But also another, and that's a little bit linked in terms of the data transparency. And I think it's great that we also here look at the companies that are doing well, that are publishing data that may go even beyond compliance, beyond what they're supposed to be publishing, which is also great because very often we see that companies say, oh no, this is data we can't publish because it's confidential or it's against the business interest. And I think to have companies that are publishing data is really, really good and leading by example. So just overall, I think a really important report that goes beyond the topic of digital inclusion really, and puts the spotlight on what digital companies and the digital industry can do by leading through example and becoming a driver of change, including in the area of green digital transformation. And so we look forward to working together with the WBA and producing the Greening Digital Companies report based on a lot of the data in this report. Thank you very much.
Vanessa, I think it's key. I think devices and data represent almost 5% of GHG emission worldwide, so maybe more than the airline sector. So I think it's a very important piece of work you will produce for June. So looking forward to it. I think we had two questions for further intervention. So maybe I start with Josiane and I will give you then the word. Josiane, please.
Thank you. So I'm Josiane Gallia-Barron. I'm part of UNICEF's Business Engagement and Child Rights team. So very briefly, I want to start by thanking World Benchmarking Alliance for this work. It's a really, really valuable source of data and underlining some of the points also that you made, Vanessa. Of course, there's many different touch points between child rights and the topics covered on the digital inclusion benchmark for the purposes of responsible business conduct and sort of respecting and upholding children's rights in the digital environment. The use section is really important and some, not very encouraging results in relation to the child online safety commitments piece that I think has been a consistent finding, but also really welcome kind of evolution towards looking at child rights or child digital rights, child rights in the digital environment, it was also really great to hear about the improvement that you've seen and the power of sort of bringing visibility to these issues and bringing more kind of conversations around that. So on the child rights element, I think it's clear that we need more of a quantum leap in this space, and really look forward to working together on convening and sharing best practice, bringing children's own views into these discussions as well. And so just a really a note of thanks for that.
Self-help. I'm going to speak in two capacities, so I'm going to start with the first one. So I am with the IEEE, the Society for the Social Implications of Technology. I chair the Sustainability Technical Committee. I want to say that the IEEE could be a great partner with WBA, but the particular issue that the IEEE Standards Association really cares about is online child protection. So I think we should start there and move that, because what Mark said, that gosh, it was only 13 and only 9 of them are actually doing anything, is really, really alarming, especially for all of those who care about the children. So let's do something. And with the IEEE alerting their 400,000 members to know which companies they should be working for is really a way to influence. So that's one thing. Now, the second capacity, I'm the chair of the People-Centered Internet. And with DEO of the World Benchmarking Alliance, we are writing together a paper for the Japan G7 a policy recommendation, which actually ties to the ITUD innovation hubs that Dr. Cosmos Zawazawa is proposing. So if we can actually move this through on the G7 for the ITU, then the innovation hubs should be publishing the WBA leaderboards in every country. And we should just do this in a really combined way. We all care about this stuff. And so thank you, World Benchmarking Alliance.
Speaking about multi-stakeholder approach, I think that's exactly the goal of today's discussion, to create these links and to see how we can move. And on child, I think we have folders here. I would add to data protection, of course, protection of children on that. But more and more alarming for me is also how those companies are creating ecosystem to make children addict to their technology. And that's the basic economic principle, creating barrier to entry and making ecosystem which makes them addict to the technology. And we also should, I think, at one stage include this, how companies are dealing with that. I think you wanted, yeah, please.
Thank you. Just wanted to respond also to the social transformation bits with the human rights indicators, decent work, and ethical conduct. So those are 18 indicators that we are assessing all 2,000 companies in the World Benchmarking Alliance's Keystone category. But in this digital inclusion benchmark, so the human rights bit looks at fundamental rights at work and the company's commitments and practices, but things like online child safety and also ethical AI were part of the digital inclusion benchmark methodology. And after 3 iterations, we've found that there is room for improvement in our own methodology. So this year we'll be embarking on a review of our methodology. And one of the things that you will see in our insights report is a conversation around what we think would need to change. And then this is our proposed indicator review, methodology review, where we welcome stakeholders to consult. And there will be a call for consultations around this as well. So specifically looking at ethical AI, it was, an element of one of the indicators, but now realizing how important it is. And we are looking at, not just if companies are publicizing these ethical AI principles, as they call it. And like you said, ethics means different things to different people, but also how they're operationalizing this. And also in terms of child online safety, we've looked at it in a way of, our children being shielded from content, from these kind of data, data mining kind of things. But going forward, I think we are trying to see, similar to how UNICEF is seeing this as, this is a child's right to be online in a safe space. So how do we make sure that our assessment is asking the right questions around those? So just two examples on how we are trying to review our methodology and welcome consultations once we open them up from other stakeholders like you as well.
Thank you. It's soon time to conclude, but first of all, I would, before concluding, not first of all, before just the end, I would just give also the word to Gio. You mentioned the work you're doing there, maybe how we can embark more people on influencing company. Gio, please.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I'm not gonna take a lot of your time. Just wanted to deliver a call for invitations for everyone in the room. Since October last year, we've been working together to develop a consultations and submissions for the UN Global Digital Compact. And our submissions for the UN Global Digital Compact has been consulted with 11 organizations, and we're still opening it more for more endorsement that comes from the room. So as Samita and colleagues here has already mentioned about all the things that's within our report and our benchmark, we are also absorbing the key 4 important points of this benchmark, and we would like to submit it as a part of how we can bring a change globally. And our submissions is available on the screen. You may want to look at the draft submissions and also join the submissions. And we will be opening this until the 24th of March because the deadline from the UN Tech Envoy is on the 31st. The 4 key areas that we're looking at is how corporates can play their parts for connectivity, universal access to children and women and other vulnerable groups, online safety and human rights, which is a topical issue that we discussed today, particularly with regards to online child protections, ethical AI regulations, as well as data protections. So if you are also sharing the same spirit with us on these 4 key issues, as well as how companies and technology corporate actors should be part of the UN Global Digital Compact, should have a space there, we would like to welcome you to support this as well. And then we will be engaging further on how we can disseminate this along the process and the negotiations of the UN Global Digital Compact that will be launched next year in the Summits for the Future. Thank you very much. I'm giving this back to Matt. I hope I'm not taking so much time. Vincent.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think it's time to conclude, but Nicolas, you said you might be 5 more minutes. If there is any other question. Yes, we have another question. We have 5 minutes? Good.
Hello, but I'm sorry for the late. Abrinci, it's a Brazilian Association of Internet Service Providers. We are going to share our contributions with the Benchmark Alliance, and we also support the initiative for strength the regional organizations and movements through the Digital Global Compact. So we reaffirm our support to the initiative, okay? And we are very pleased to see all the results.
Thank you, very encouraging. So it's my task, I think, as moderator to conclude, or I don't know if you have any final word on your side. So thank you very much for all the work done from the World Benchmarking Alliance. Again, for us as investors, it's a very useful tool to assess companies, but also to engage in dialogue. And I'm looking forward also for the continuing discussion with the corporate side. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for the invitation. And I hope you have a good stay in Geneva. So have a good day. Bye-bye.
don't know.